Hey, Michael. I see your name here. How are you?
Hi, sorry, I'm good. How are you doing?
Oh, your mask.
I don't see you. Are you there?
Oh, I didn't show myself because Amy's doing the actual presentation. So
Oh,
here.
there you are.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, I'm in clinic and just, it's hard to do a neuromuscular exam by video. But
Yeah.
6 feet away from patients, it's hard to do it.
hey, that too, yes.
Shannon Barris sent out this really cool thing about how to do the cranial nerve exam on video, and it actually sort of worked. I did it the other day. Not many of my patients
Yeah,
are that cooperative, but
we're
whatever.
definitely reaching in the toolkit here to do these. Like, you can do a
Yeah.
lot of functional stuff through, just having them sit and lay down and all that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's
How are
interesting.
y'all doing?
Fine, fine. I have a question. Are either of you guys, do you know if you're doing COVID testing prior to EEGs?
No,
We're doing,
so
we're
having
gonna do it
a,
before EMU, but we're
yeah,
discussing routine
same.
EEGs.
So not
Yeah,
routines, but emus?
Yeah.
Okay.
we're the same way because that was actually a big debate about even restarting the EEGs.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think it's a logistic nightmare to think about. But all right, I'm gonna get off the video, Amy. You're the star.
Okay, I would say that our EEG techs really want us to do testing for routine, even for routine EEG. So we're having ongoing discussions about it.
Yeah. I think that when I looked at so the hours that the drive-through is open, not that I'm sure you could exactly do a testing on some of my patients with the drive-through, but it's not that many hours. So the families would really have to commit to hitting the drive-through 2 days before, then going,
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll get off. I would say that a lot of the people at my institution anyway are doing the AAN. There's some kind of online thing because the meeting got canceled. So I'm not sure how much participation we're going to get. We'll have to see.
Okay, well, so far we have 8 participants and we're 2 of them. So.
And I'm looking forward to hearing this, so it's good.
One of them's Erica, and then a couple other people. I know the AEN is doing a lot of online stuff, but I didn't realize they were doing something today.
I don't actually, I just got feedback from one of the senior residents who was going to go to the AAN meeting, I guess, and since it got canceled, they're doing something online, but I don't know if they're doing the whole program or not.
Well, I mean, they're certainly not doing the whole program in an hour, but I think they're offering different parts of it at different times. I know that ABPN gave AAN a grant to put a lot of their CME stuff online from the meeting.
Oh, nice. All right, well, we'll wait a few minutes because it's a little bit early.
Okay.
I am going to record it, or try to record it.
Oh. Let's see if we can. Let me just try this screen share and see it. Host disabled attendee screen sharing.
All right,
you have to enable me.
You are now a co-host.
Okay.
Okay. Give it a sec, and then it should work. There you go.
Ooh, look at that. Now let's see if there's the usual way to put it into. Outstanding. How snazzy is that? All right, and I can even go back and forth. This is very exciting.
So maybe we'll start at 2 or 3 after.
Okay.
We can always, if it really, I mean, usually we've been getting about 30 people. So if the attendance is low, it could be the AAN thing. We might,
I can't believe people picked AAN over me.
shocking.
Very upsetting.
Well, we'll see. Anyway.
There we go. Let's see who all is on. Oh, there are a number of people. Juliet's on. Oh, good. Now I can show her aims with impunity because I know she's on and can defend herself.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Juliet. How are you? All right. We're just waiting apparently a couple minutes because Brenda thinks more people are going to join. So
Yeah, I think we should wait until like 2 or 3 after.
Brenda, do you know how many people were able to open the MailChimp thing? Because I sort of had to dig mine out of
No. Amber sent it, and I don't know. I didn't look today. So if we need to, well, I can make an announcement while everybody's on here. If you have noticed, we've been sending out these announcements through MailChimp, and we know that a lot of people have their system at their university blocks MailChimp in general. And if you ever get an email that you want that was, let's say, in your junk or trash or whatever, if you could go in and retrieve it and tell your email system to not trash it, that does help us and help us communicate with you. So I don't know, we do the best we can.
All right. Yeah, it's always so hard when you don't see anyone, so you never quite know what they're getting and what they're not.
Yeah, and the thing is, I'm not even totally, we can see how many people open it, but we don't actually know how many people like got it and just thought, yeah, I don't want to open it. So it's hard to know. But about half the people typically open it, whatever that's worth. All right, maybe you want to. People are still joining. We'll give it one more minute. 11:05.
Okay. I'm just following you. You're in charge. All right.
All right, you
We
want to
should
go?
have theme music or something going. Sure.
Sorry, I could hum.
No, that's. Oh, please don't. All right. Well, maybe we'll go ahead and get started, especially if you're recording it, because that way people can watch it later. So welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Brooks-Kayal. I am one of the co-directors of the CNCDP K-12. And at Brenda Porter's behest, since she's in charge of our webinar and educational programming, we are going to talk today about specific AIMS pages. Per Brenda's direction, we're going to be talking about how to be clear and concise. And then I also just added in some kibitzing in advance. Let's see if I can make this. Oh, it doesn't want to move that way. Sorry, I'm going to figure out how I make this move. There we go. So this is for those of you who were fortunate enough to see any of the presentations by Rick McGee. He's a faculty member at Northwestern that spends a lot of his time and effort talking about effective writing, both grant writing and paper writing. And this is just some comments from a presentation that he did for us a couple of years ago at the CNCDP retreat, just talking about overall thinking about your writing as telling a story. And I would argue that that very much applies to grant applications too, that you really are telling a story to your reviewers. And it's important that you keep that in mind as you're writing any part of your application, but particularly the specific aims, because as we'll talk about, that is, the singularly most important page of any grant application. So you really want to take the opportunity to guide how your reviewer is thinking about your project. And so what you want to do is make sure that you're explaining to them in a clear way why your project is important, why you're the right person to do it, and why it is highly likely to be successful. And you want to think at all times about what your reviewer might be thinking about and specifically try to write to that. So think about questions a reviewer might have and try to answer those questions preferably before they've even developed them. So if you can answer it, those questions may never arise in their minds, and that's always a very successful approach to writing your application. It's really important, particularly if you're going to wade into an area that's controversial, or if you're going to, challenge current thinking in some way. I would also say if you are using techniques that are very novel and new, because that definitely adds to the innovation, but that can also add to the questions about the approach if your reviewers are not familiar with the techniques you're going to be using. Particularly important for a K award is to remember to write to different levels of reviewers. Assume your reviewers are not experts in the field. And I say this to mean make sure that you give them sufficient background so any well-qualified scientist can understand and review your application. However, there may be someone who is an exquisite expert in your field, so don't assume that they won't know if you play fast and loose with the facts or previous published information. So you have to simultaneously write to people who aren't experts in the field and to those who might be experts in the field, which is always a challenge, but you have to sort of thread that needle in an effective grant application. And make sure that your writing is very clear, and make sure you adhere to typical rigorous writing standards. So make sure that, just like you learned in probably middle or even elementary school, each paragraph needs a topic sentence. The sentences should be logically connected. Things should be grammatically correct. There is little excuse for spelling errors now that we have spell check, and your reviewers know that. Lots of errors throughout an application are just going to make your reviewer think you're sloppy, and sloppy and science do not go well together. So make sure that things are very well cleaned up. And just like you make sure that you start each paragraph with a meaningful topic sentence, make sure you end the paragraph appropriately, either summing up what the paragraph has said or indicating the transition to the next paragraph. So again, these are just general writing techniques, but sometimes, particularly since we don't have to practice this in medical records all the time, we can get a little sloppy about not doing this. And if you do it, it's going to make your application easier to read, easier to follow, and it overall is going to give your reviewers a sense that you are a careful, precise person, and those are qualities that tend to make for good science. So they're going to think positively about you and your application. On the other hand, if the writing is difficult to follow and there are errors and mistakes even small ones throughout it. You reference the wrong figure number, you have spelling mistakes you haven't corrected, your grammar is bad, that is not going to reflect well on you, and it's just going to put your reviewer in a mindset that you are not a very careful or precise person. So don't do it. Keep in mind, again, if you are writing for your reviewers, remember what your reviewer is expected to look for, because these are the questions you want to answer for him or her, right? So the things that your reviewer is told to review the application on is the overall impact or merit, which is made up of a number of different aspects. So they think about you as a candidate. Why are you the right person to do this? Why should the NIH invest, $500,000 in you as a scientist, and what is the likelihood that you're going to be successful based on what you've done before and your knowledge of the field? What are your career development plans going to be, and how is that going to make it likely that you're going to be successful? The science itself is, the research plan obviously is very important, and the specific aims is officially part of that research plan, but I would argue that it should probably speak to all of these points to the degree that is possible. Your mentors, co-mentors, and consultants and collaborators are considered an important part of this, and then obviously your institutional commitment and environment are considered really critical points. You can't always refer to all of them in the specific aims, but as many as you can comment on, I think, in a positive way can be very helpful. So it's always good as you're writing to keep in mind what people are looking for and the specific areas that they're going to be scoring you on. So for the specific aims themselves, again, it's going to be one page, and it's got to be clear. It's got to tell your story very concisely. That one page has got to go from beginning to end. So, first you've got to set the context. Why is this an important problem or need? Why is it significant? What is already known about it, either from your own work or the work of others? And then what is the gap? What is the new information that you're going to find that's going to fill the gap between what is known and what needs to be known? And then, specifically what question you're going to ask that's going to fill that gap, and concisely but precisely how you are going to test that hypothesis. For the specific aims themselves, you want to have a bulleted list. And we'll see an example from Juliet's specific aims of that, usually with a sentence or two of detail about each aim. And then you want to make always end when you can with a very clear impact statement about how completing this application or project is going to result in not only hopefully answering an important question, but also launching you as a investigator who has a whole successful scientific career ahead of them, where you will continue to make impact throughout your life. And that's, again, for the KO8s and K23s, those are really important selling points. The scoring is about a third on the candidate, about a third on the mentor and institution, and about a third on the research plan itself, which reflects on both of those things, both you as a candidate and your mentor. If it's not a strong research plan, that it will reflect negatively on that. But it's important to always talk about how this project is going to help you launch your successful independent career as an investigator. So again, being very clear at all times on what you're going to do, why it's important, and why you're the best person to do this particular project. And preferably why the environment you're in is a particularly good place in which you would develop these skills and do this project. And again, just to be clear, without question, most people think specific aims are the most critical page of your application. They really make or break your reviewer enthusiasm. They're typically the first thing after the brief abstract that your reviewers are going to read. If they read it and they get excited, then they go into the rest of your application with a very positive view of the project and you as an investigator. And if the specific aims are disorganized and difficult to understand or just boring, then your reviewers are going to not want to read the application. They're not going to feel supportive of you just going in, subconsciously. So you really want to get to them with your specific aims. A mentor of both Brenda's and mine used to say he would write his specific aims 6 months in advance and then put them away for a month and then take them out and read them again, edit them and have somebody else look at them and then put them away again. It just so that you could read it multiple times without having, just looked at it, so he could really get it just perfect. And then he would start on the other parts of the application. So as far as flow of the aims themselves, you want to go from sort of strongest and most feasible and most likely to be successful to sort of most risky and most exciting. So usually aim 1, you want to make sure that it's very feasible, that it's very likely to work, and preferably that it's going to give useful information no matter what your result is. So what you don't want to do is ask in aim 1 a question where only one answer is going to make aim 2 and aim 3 important or doable. That's called making aims dependent on each other, and that is always a bad idea. Your reviewers will hate that. So you want aim 1 to be something that, whether the answer could be the hypothesis or the null hypothesis, and no matter which is the correct answer, that is still useful and important information, and aim 2 and aim 3 will still seem like good ideas after that. Aim 2, you can get into things that are a little riskier. This is Brenda's wording: cool, exciting, or bold. And also sometimes this is where you go into things that are a bit more mechanistic, or using some newer techniques that haven't been used again. But again, you want to make sure that it is not, aim 2 is not dependent on the specific results of aim 1, nor should the results of aim 2 be required to be successful for aim 3 to happen, because again, that tends to make dependent aims. And then aim 3 preferably is something that might set you up to move into your R application after that. Something that's sort of going to, launch the next project, be more translational often. And again, aim 3 is probably the aim where you can put the most risky aspects of what you're going to do, because if aim 1 and aim 2 are clearly going to be feasible and doable and give really useful information no matter what, aim 3 can be a little more exploratory. And you can usually, they'll usually by they get to time they'll get to aim 3, they'll say, oh, more exploratory, a little riskier, but okay, because aim 1 and aim 2 are really strong. So if you're going to put in risky stuff, aim 3 is probably the place to do it. And again, don't make the aims dependent on each other. And finally, and then we'll stop before we go into specific examples, pay really close attention to how your page looks. If you have used every single millimeter of space and made the spacing as tight as allowed by the NIH, 0.6 margins, no white space, using every inch or a centimeter that's available, you're going to exhaust your reviewers in the first page. And again, they're going to be thinking, oh my gosh, I have 12 more pages of this to have to deal with. So you want to be concise, and one of the reasons you want to be concise is so that you can give that white space. You can format it in a way that it looks nice and clean. If there are key points, you bold them or underline them, and when possible, use bullet points. So this is, hopefully Brenda, you got permission for this from Fiona. But this is Fiona's Ames page, and we thank her for allowing us to share them. And it's very small, so I'm not expecting you to read through it, but what I want you to see is that, you know, there's nice space between the paragraphs. The specific aims are bulleted and, you know, very clear. She's bolded the specific need that current epilepsy therapies do not stop interictal discharges. And the second paragraph, she has bolded her overarching hypothesis to make sure your viewers can't miss that. She has bolded the specific aims 1 and 2, and then points out the clinical significance and the future work at the end. So again, making sure that she's, you know, finishing strong with why the potential clinical impact of the work, and how this is going to launch her into her independent career as an investigator. So before we get into sample aims, does anybody have questions about sort of the overall, you know, overall presentation of your aims and how to structure them? Wow. Must be a lot clearer than usual. All right. Well,
it's Brenda. Since you focused on the Ks, when people submit a K, who should be the people that they think are reading it, and who should be the people that they're having read it before they submit it? Like, I guess, like, who are the people that are best to approach for a K, for example, to read your aims page, and then who's on the other side, who's actually reading it? Like, how do you figure that part out?
So in terms of who you should have read it, you want as closely as possible that to mirror who you think is going to be a potential reviewer. So one way to figure out your potential reviewers is to go look at the study section roster. So most of the K awards go to NST1. Brenda, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that is still the case. And you can go and look at the types of reviewers who are currently or have recently sat on that review section. And that'll give you a sense of the type of people that may be looking at your grant. You can do that. You can literally go, it's a NINDS study section. So you can go to the NINDS page and you can search review groups, which is what they're listed as. I don't think they're listed as study sections usually. And you can just type N as in Nancy, S as in Sam, T as in truck, NST1, and see what kind of reviewers are there. And what you'll see is that it's a wide variety of people with both clinical and more basic science backgrounds from pretty much all aspects of neurology and neuroscience. So again, may not be people with deep expertise in your particular area. And then along the same lines, for who you want to have review your specific aims and your grant in general, obviously the first person is your mentor. And your mentor's job is to make sure that it is generally structured well, that you are not making any factual or scientific errors related to the specific topic, because right, they're almost certainly topic experts in your area. But you don't want them to be the only people, because again, they are topic experts in the area. So, you know, they're not gonna be confused by something that is well established in their particular field. So what you want to also do is get other people to do it. So other clinician investigators and or science faculty that you work with, get some of them to read it, preferably some who are not experts in the field. And then if at all possible, participate in a pre-K study section. Many institutions have these mock pre-K study sections that you can participate in And again, it will be a broad array of people reviewing it, but that's not a bad thing, because then you're going to know if some of the information you're presenting is not clear to someone who is not a topic expert in your specific area. Any other suggestions, Brenda, of other people?
It probably would be worth if you can identify someone at your home institution that sat on that study section recently. They won't be allowed to sit in on the grant evaluation anyway, so they won't, you know, it won't make a difference if they've read it ahead of time, but they can give you the flavor of the study section at that sort of time period, and if there's any like wording in the grant that's going to set somebody off, or at
Not
least,
that that ever happens.
no, but as you may know, if you've ever sat on a study section, things can go downhill very quickly just based on like one little nugget of annoyance on someone's part,
Yeah.
and then it kind of snowballs. So, and a lot of times it's something dumb that like you didn't even realize you were saying it, and then somebody picks up on it and other people are like, oh, well, yeah, that's a problem and this is a problem. So I would see if you can identify someone who has sat on that study section recently, or they might be able to pick up on little hints. There's a question in the chat that I'm reading. I think you may get to this, but they want to know how specific they should be in the bullet points with experimental and technical details to demonstrate competency versus keeping general and high level approach.
So in your specific aims, and we'll look at this with Juliet's aims actually, you can only be so specific, right? I mean, you can only detail so much. You really only have maybe 2 sentences for each aim, because otherwise you're gonna just have far too much in the specific aims, and it's gonna again be crowded and seem not concise. So you are going to be limited with that. The reviewers are not expecting a lot of experimental detail in the specific aims. They're looking for your approach and you know, sort of the general methodologies that you're going to use, but they know that it's 1 page and you just won't have a lot for experimental detail. All right. Any other questions in the chat box, Brenda? It's hard for me to see the chat box.
There's one here that says, thoughts about 2 aims versus 3 aims.
You know, it depends on how you break them up. So 2 aims can be more than sufficient. And I think that, yeah, so I guess we don't, this is a 3 aim example from Fiona. So 2 aims can be sufficient for a K if each aim has several major subparts to it. Otherwise, traditionally you will see 3 aims. What you don't want to do is for a K award that is a 5-year grant, and where you are expected to be an early career investigator, because that's why you're getting a K award, to have 3 aims with multiple subsections on each aim, because that's going to be considered overambitious. And the most common word that appears in a review of a junior investigator grant, be it a K or a first R01, is overambitious. It's a very, very common rabbit hole that many of us, you know, end up going down as early career investigators. So usually you will put down your aims and you'll think, gosh, this doesn't seem like enough, and your mentor may go through them and say this is overambitious, and believe them, because underambitious I don't think I've ever heard in a review of a K grant, but you hear overambitious all the time, and it happens to everybody. I remember going back after I was going back and looking at my first R01 application when I was going to renew it. I remember looking at it thinking, oh my God, I can't believe they funded this. I mean, there's just no way in the world I was going to get all of this done. It is very common.
Okay.
All right. let's look at some exemplar aims. So this is Juliet Knowles's aims for her recently submitted KO8. So we should have appropriate sensitivity that it hasn't been reviewed yet. So let's be nice. But actually, I picked it not just because I am fortunate enough to mentor Juliet through the CNCDP, but also because I thought they were quite well written. So I thought we would share them. So in order for them to be readable, I have taken basically each paragraph on a different slide. So we will just go through paragraph by paragraph. So this first slide is the initial paragraph. And again, if you remember, what we said is you need to set the context, right? You need to say what you're going to be studying, and then fairly soon after that, why this is an important thing to study. So Juliet is starting out by pointing out that abnormal plasticity and excessive synchrony underlies, epilepsy, basically. And that the process of that transition is epileptogenesis. So again, just, basically setting the stage, in case someone who studies autism ends up with her grant, which they could, and make sure that everybody's clear on what the terms and usage are. Not everybody knows what the term epileptogenesis is. So you want to make sure that your reviewers are clear on what you mean by epileptogenesis, because you're going to be using it throughout the rest of the application. And then she talks about why it'll be important to understand the mechanisms that are, underlying epileptogenesis, and the need to develop disease-modifying therapies. So again, defining the issue and why it is important, and then talking specifically about the area that her application is going to focus on, which is myelin plasticity. So this is a good example of where I can guarantee you almost no one on a case study section is going to have expertise in both the areas of epileptogenesis and myelin plasticity, because those are not typically discussed in the same application. So this is where it's going to be really important to be very clear, so that the epilepsy people, understand about the myelin, and if there are people there that are, myelin experts, they understand, the study of epilepsy and what epileptogenesis is, and for both of them, why these are important to talk about together. So she then describes myelin plasticity, and that it is, activity dependent, and has been linked to network synchronization, and defines that, which is really great. And then talks about the fact that, the potential role of how dysregulation of an activity-dependent process like myelin plasticity in the evolution of epileptic networks is not known. So again, providing sort of the basic context and setting people up for why her particular project is going to be novel. All right. Any questions about that? Again, I think a good job of sort of setting the stage. So the first paragraph sets a very general tone, about the area in general, and then she, sort of fills that out with additional things the reviewers are going to need to understand why the bulleted specific aims that are going to follow are going to be important, right? So she explains about what myelin does and why it's important, and talks about myelin growth and maturation, and the fact that that is key for learning and development of new skills. She talks about the fact that it's been established to be activity dependent, which is really important, and a concept that I think a lot of people are not necessarily well aware of. And then the underlying mechanisms that drive that, and in this case, BDNF signaling. And that'll be important, as you'll see, because she's going to pull that in her study. So it's really important that she specify upfront the role that BDNF specifically on OPCs plays in activity-dependent myelination. So again, a little bit, first paragraph, a very general, this is the problem, this is why it's important, this is what we're gonna do that's different to fill this gap. And then the next paragraph, providing more detail to let people know, give reviewers the information that they would need to then understand the importance of the aims that are gonna come. And then the third paragraph is basically the proposal. What are we going to do? Again, she's proposing that the pathological hyperactivity associated with epilepsy drives abnormal myelination, which she has just told us is an activity-dependent process. So that makes sense, right? And that abnormal myelination is going to disrupt network function. And then she's going to talk about very briefly some work that she has done that has shown that, in fact, the myelin sheath thickness / activity-dependent myelin growth in the corpus callosum of 2 rodent models of genetic epilepsies is increased, and that they have spontaneous thalamocortical hypersynchrony and absence seizures associated with this, again, supporting the hypothesis that epilepsy drives abnormal myelination. So she also says that seizures are required for the myelin abnormalities, and she will demonstrate that in more detail in the application itself. But she knows she has the preliminary data to demonstrate that. And then also points out that activity-dependent myelination appears to actually contribute to seizure frequency. And again, these are preliminary studies that she's going to outline and detail in the application, but it's okay in the specific aims just to state that that's what your preliminary studies have showed. Again, if it was a study in literature, then you could cite it, right? So that's the other thing, but you want to be very succinct, saying what you want to say, and either support it in your application with preliminary data or provide a reference if it's previous work. And then very importantly and appropriately bolded, she states her hypothesis, which is that seizure-induced aberrant myelination facilitates pathological hypersynchrony and contributes to epileptogenesis. And then she says, we will investigate this as a novel mechanism of epilepsy. Another way people will often say it here is, we will test this hypothesis using the following specific aims. You just want to set up the specific aims that you're going to then list. All right, trying to look at questions. Brenda, are there any questions? I see 3 comments, but.
They just have a question about citations. Do you usually cite things?
So this is a point that I have heard people argue in both directions about whether or not it is okay to have citations in the specific aims. I often do put a few citations. I don't add every citation that I'm going to have in, say, the background in the later in the grant. But if there are key things that that sort of provide the fundamental basis for your application, and you want to make sure that if people have any question about it, they can reference it, then it's probably okay to put them in. I would only do them in the format of sort of numerical superscript, because again, you don't want to use up several lines of your precious space with Smith et al. Type of references. So if you're going to do it, make sure that the whole grant is done with a numerical format reference. But I usually I often will do just a couple key references to the literature in my specific aims.
He was wondering about the use of a model, for example, or a figure to kind of clarify. On the page, on the Ames page.
Yep. So I have done that only a couple times, and usually with translational grants that have have something called go no go decisions. That where people really like to see sort of a table out, you know, a graph or a figure outlining exactly where your no go decisions are going to be and things like that. Um, the problem with any figure like that is that it's going to take up space. So it means you would have to be very, very concise with the rest of your wording, because they're, you know, if you're taking up the space of a paragraph, that's going to be a good percentage of your specific aims. And it's worse to make a small graph that people can't easily read than no graph or figure at all.
Question about whether you use the term we or I to clarify what the trainee has specifically done or will do.
That is another controversial question, I will say. I always tend to go towards the we, but I have been told many times that it's better for NK awards to say, I will do this, because it really is supposed to be about you. So that's a good point. It probably is better for a career development award that is about you, as opposed to doing career development for your mentor, to say specifically, I will investigate maladaptive myelination as a novel pathogenic mechanism in epilepsy. Once you get to our awards, it is less of a problem, because there you typically have a research team, and it really is very much a we kind of thing. So it's that the we controversy is pretty specific to K awards.
You can see that Juliet used the we, because I also am a we person. I don't know if I gave her advice or somebody else gave her advice, but
I have a comment about it. Yeah, that was something that I struggled with a little bit, and I'm writing a grant now and also kind of struggling with that question. But I think it seems to me that equally important is to emphasize that, you know, whatever idea you're looking at in your K, that it's, you know, it's your idea and you're going to be able to take it with you as an independent investigator. That's really important. And then, you know, talking about how you're going to use this in your future career. I mean, I think all those things to me seem more important than whether you're using I or we.
And I would completely agree with that. However, I have written things before using we, because I almost always use we, because I think there are very few things that I have truly done that was not part of a team effort, and had people explicitly say, I have no idea what your role in this was, because everything is we. So again, I think for a K award, using I may be a little bit better. But you could always, you know, if you wanted to, you could say something like, I propose, because you are proposing, it's not a we, right? I propose that in epilepsy, pathological seizure activity drives abnormal myelination, disrupting network function. With my mentor, I discovered, or something like that. I mean, if the concern is you're taking, you know, all of the credit when, you know, your mentor and members of her lab group are important to it, you can always do, you know, do something like that to point out that it's a collaborative effort. I would also say something that I had not noticed, but somebody pointed out to me, is this tends to be somewhat of a gendered issue, that women almost always use we, and it's less of an issue. Men have a tendency more to use I. Again, it may be part of our, you know, socialization. You know, it's just something to keep in mind. I don't think it's a make or break, but it can give the idea that that you are not the person driving these ideas when you only use we. So, but I'm as guilty of it as anyone, believe me. All right, let's see what Juliet's actual specific aims are, and she can feel free to continue to chime in since she knows more about the underlying process of development of these aims than anyone else. So she's very clear, and again, you want to, with each aim, specifically say what you're going to do. So specific aim, she's going to determine the network level myelin structural abnormalities resulting from absence seizures. Now she's using more than a couple sentences, so this is a little longer than usual. But again, just reminding people what has previously been demonstrated, right? Why that information alone is not sufficient, and in this case, because there are limitations of the spatial extent of what you can look at with electron microscopy. The specific hypothesis that she's going to test, and then the specific method that she's going to use, again, not in great detail, but just giving a little information on quantitative magnetization transfer, and how that will help her to examine these. So again, not a huge amount of experimental detail because there just isn't space for that, but enough that the reviewer can understand what she's going to be doing. And then importantly, at the end, she points out what she predicts will happen, what the predicted results are. So again, I think well-structured, a little longer than many people like to have the explanation for the aim, but I think it gets to all of the key points.
Actually, my mentor has a formula for writing the aims, which I was following. And the formula that she uses is basically, it's kind of like a microcosm of your actual aims in the grant. The first sentence or two sets the background or the problem or the question. Then the second sentence is your hypothesis. The next sentence or two is your methods, including a statement of what your endpoints will be. And then the final sentence is your prediction. Mm-hmm. And so I followed that for all three of the aims.
Yep. And by the way, Juliet's mentor is an extraordinarily successful physician scientist. So I would say do whatever Michelle Monge tells you to do.
Thanks.
But yeah, and I completely agree with that. It's just a matter of how many sentences you use in sort of the explanation of each of those. So that's why I said I think you absolutely hit all of the key points on this. Specific aim 2. Well, actually, Juliet, now that I know that you're on, do you want to do specific aim 2? Walk us through it.
Michael, turn it down a little bit.
Sure. So specific aim 2, so we're going to determine whether activity-dependent myelination induces thalamocortical network hypersynchrony. So like you said, this is a more mechanistic aim. Basically, I explained that as part of the background, we've generated these mice where we can specifically inducibly and conditionally knock out the TrkB receptor from OPCs, which is an intervention that will prevent subsequent activity-dependent myelination, and reemphasizing that we hypothesize that seizure-induced myelination facilitates excessive thalamocortical hypersynchrony, which in the background we stated was part of epileptogenesis. And And what we're going to specifically do is block activity-dependent myelination, starting at seizure onset and continuing through the period of epileptogenesis, and then look at how that affects established indices of thalamocortical hypersynchrony in acute brain slices. So we'll be using slice physiology to look at the established measures of synchrony that I list out there. And then we predict that blocking activity-dependent myelination will prevent those indices of hypersynchrony.
Great. Any questions? So again, following a very consistent formula with each aim. So it's very clear to your reviewers. They kind of know what to expect. They see why you're doing it, what you're going to do, what your question is, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and then what you expect to happen. A very, very consistent and clear approach.
I'm curious as to whether, so one of the things that I was often taught and I try to do is do a one sentence at the very end, sort of summary, maybe not necessarily like how cool this is, but something summing up how important it is. I don't always do that, but what do you guys think of that?
Well, Juliet will do that at the end. She does a paragraph on the end that very explicitly talks about the impact of the studies. That I often find is the most useful because otherwise it can get a bit redundant. If you put a sentence at the end of each of the specific aims. So I tend to put that in a brief final paragraph at the end on the impact.
I think that sometimes when it works well to put one at the end of each one is if there's sort of a difference. So I agree with you that you need to do it somewhere, and I don't know where the right place to do it is, but if each aim has some nuance or difference in the impact, sometimes I think it fits better there. So I think you should always do it. I'm just not always sure where it should go.
And it may vary between applications depending on how much your aims are similar and if they address similar points in with different approaches, or whether they're really each addressing a very different but aligned question. So it may be you have to decide with each application which one seems to make the most sense. And try it out, right? Write your aims with a sentence at each end of each aim and then see how that looks. And if that doesn't seem right or it's too long, then try, combining it all into a single paragraph at the end of your aims. All right. I'm a little frozen right now.
It's up there for us.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to advance it and my screen is frozen. There we go. We've unfrozen now. I just need to give it a moment when my internet decides it wants to take a little break.
Okay.
All
You
right.
skipped aim 3, but that's fine.
I did, and I didn't mean to. It's because I was angrily hitting my keys here. All right. So aim 3. I would say same sort of pattern, very clearly states what she's going to look at, determine whether activity-dependent myelination contributes to epileptogenesis, why she thinks that because of her preliminary data that show that activity-dependent myelination increases in mice with spontaneous seizures. And that she therefore hypothesizes that seizure-induced myelination will contribute to epileptogenesis. What she's going to do, she's going to genetically block that in a similar fashion to what she's done in aim 2. And again, a way to save space is not reiterate your methods, but refer back if you've already told the reviewers how you're going to do it. Just remind them that you've told them already. and then specifically how she's going to assess, the severity of epileptogenesis, right, which is with electrocorticography to look at seizure burden. And finally, as Juliet said, and as she was instructed by her mentor, she will end by telling you what her expectation is for the results of these studies. So again, same, a very methodical outline, so the reviewers, understand, how you're approaching things. And then, in my opinion, probably the single most important paragraph, which is the last paragraph, on impact, and that's impact in terms of what the results of the studies are going to show, and also in terms of how completing this project would position Juliet to be a fabulously successful independent investigator. So again, with K Awards in particular, really important to emphasize both of those points. And then finishing up with, and when I become a fabulously successful independent investigator, this is what I will do, right? And notice the eyes here. So she's got an eye there, and she's got an eye here. I don't know if you guys can see my arrows or not, but I'm pointing out various eyes. So here, very appropriately, Juliet uses the I word instead of the we word to talk about herself and her career development.
There's a question. You guys can unmute yourself, I hope, in case you guys want to ask questions. But somebody asked a question about controversial. So sort of, if the topic is controversial, do you think it's okay to say we believe with appropriate explanation to establish rationale after addressing that it is controversial?
You can certainly state that there is controversy and what your opinion in that controversy is. I would make sure to state why you believe that that's the case, hopefully with some published literature or a direct reference to preliminary data that you are going to be including in the application. So I think it's fine, and I think it's probably better to acknowledge a controversy than to pretend it doesn't exist, because again, if you get a topic expert in your field who knows that there's a controversy and you didn't point out that there's a controversy, they may assume that you don't even know the literature well enough to realize what you're proposing is controversial. So always try to answer the reviewer's questions before they have it. So don't make them question if you know there's a controversy by telling them straight up front that you know it's a controversy. I would be a little wary of wading into things that are too controversial for a K award. During your proposal for a K proposal. If you are wading into a controversy, I would say design your experiments such that no matter what answer you get, it is going to be informative. So you don't want to take a very controversial topic and design a bunch of experiments where if you're wrong about your opinion in the controversy, your project is going to fail, because that is a very dicey position to take as an early career investigator. You can do that later, but as an early career investigator, it's probably not the best idea. All right, so just a couple of conclusions, and we'll do all of the questions, or anyone who has questions. So again, I would like to make sure everybody knows my opinion about specific aims pages as being the single most important page in your application. So make sure that it's really good and that you use it to your absolute best advantage. Get your reviewers on your side early, right? And the aims page is how you do that. And make sure that you're being clear and concise, and that you make reference to the key review criteria that you know your reviewers are going to be asked to score you on. So, and thanks to both Fiona and Juliet for very kindly and bravely letting us use their specific aims in the presentation. And then happy to answer any questions, and you should feel free to direct them to Juliet or me or Brenda.
I think you can unmute yourselves if you need to.
Hey, thank you so much for this, as Melanie. I was wondering, I know it's not specifically on the specific aims, but I wondered if folks had heard anything. You know, a lot of labs are shut down, so I'm struggling to get the preliminary data I was expecting to. Do we know if the reviewers in this current study section are going to be kind of told to maybe not emphasize the preliminary data as much?
Yes, I have been told specifically from my program officer at NIH that reviewers are going to be instructed that that people may not have any preliminary data from the last 4 to 6 months before the July deadline, and that should be taken into consideration.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, and as Adam told you, and Steve Korn, if you've ever met him, they really are trying to not push a lot of preliminary data into Ks. So I think if you feel otherwise ready to go and you just don't have much preliminary data, that's probably okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Because I have a quick question at the end here, but please ask your questions. Yeah. Okay, well, one of the things that I've contemplated, first of all, we have a great talk next month by Erica Augustine's going to talk about clinical trials and how to set up like a kind of clinical trials network or get yourself intercalated. It's right there. And then we have one on May 20th about how to apply for the CNCD PK-12. But one of the thoughts I've had about how to do remote mentoring of child neurologists would be to have something like a Grants Journal Club, a remote, like kind of Zoom-based Grants Journal Club. If people might be interested in that, and when I say Grants Journal Club, what we would do is, for instance, we could have a meeting in May to look at people's specific aims pages. The problem with that is I cannot ensure that you will not have a competitor in that group listening to what you're telling me or sharing. So it's a little bit, I guess there's some risk involved because I can't close the group. I'm going to keep it within child neurology, obviously, but would that be of interest to people, or would they feel like that's too risky for them or not of value?
I think it would be a value, but maybe you could use things that are not in the current cycle, you know. Like
Oh, well, I was actually thinking of specifically using things that are going to go in like in June or July. Let's say you got, reviews and you're going in July. It would actually, I was thinking of being more focused on that sort of concept of having other people read your aims. I struggle with trying to figure out how to help people at institutions that don't have a vast network of people to help them. And that's why I was thinking of it. But it would totally be voluntary. And if it looks like a couple people think it would be helpful. Yeah, so I agree with you, Michael. There are downsides. All right, well, if anybody wants to reach out to me about that concept, please do. Just send me an email and we'll come up with something if that would be good. Otherwise, any other last minute questions?
Nope.
No?
Stop share. No.
I have one about the just the the pandemic impact and like timelines for application and everything. Is that everything still I know it may not be known, but full steam ahead or?
The only change that I had heard about was the deadline for anything that was due after March 9th that could be submitted May 1st. So there was, there was an opportunity to delay those submissions. I have not heard about any proposed delays for the June and July submission dates. But, keep an eye out. NIH does send out emails, and you can actually go to the website and look for any updates, because they, depending on how things play out in the next few weeks, they may start delaying June and July deadlines. They just haven't made any announcement about that yet.
And then there is, I heard a new bio sketch format. I haven't looked at it, but it's like for next week or the week after. So everybody should pay attention. NIH has a new bio sketch format.
Oh yeah, I heard that. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I hope it's not too big of a change. Ugh. But anyway, just FYI.
This is what happens when we let the NIH people sit at home and come up with new ideas.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Amy, and
All right.
thanks
everybody
for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thanks, Juliet.
Thank you.